Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
I'll try that again. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Goodness me, there's some bling in this room here this morning. I look like I'm at a hip-hop convention. I was going to say I was like in Jay-Z's wardrobe, but most of you would know who Jay-Z is, would you? So I just had to say that. It's good to have you all here this morning and to have the church full of people. Thanks very much indeed for coming, and it's a great pleasure for us to be asked by the Town Council and for Mayor Murray, give me his full title, to hold the civic service here at Diva for the first time since we've been open. So thank you very much indeed for that. I mean, the obvious reason why Bob and Ron are great friends is got the same hairstyle, but I wasn't going to mention that. And also, it's great to see the Chelsea pensioners with us here this morning. Thank you very much indeed for coming. I have to say, I felt we saw some pensioners from Chelsea playing Arsenal yesterday as well, but I say that as a Liverpool fan. It was a joy to see. 3-0. And we won as well. So thank you for coming, and we just pray the Lord will bless us in our time this morning and bless Bob and the Town Council as they move forward into the coming year, into the coming administration. September 1916. In an hour's time, at 12:35 p.m, that whistle was blown. This is a replica whistle from the First World War, and this is what the armed services used when the trenches, so the men knew it was time to go over the top. Exactly 100 years ago, today, at 12:35, those whistles were blown yet again, halfway through one of the worst wars the world has ever known. The Battle of Morval was about to start. And those men, those brave men, as part of the Battle of the Somme, heard that whistle and they went out into the battle. Within 7 days, there were 19,000 casualties. My thoughts are, at the moment, we've been thinking this year, haven't we, very much of the history, the anniversary, 100 years of the Somme, that started on the 1st of July 1916 and went on, most historians agree, to about November time. And the great loss of life that occurred during those months of battle. And well, many of us have seen the great remembrances this year that we've had about this battle. And I thought it was interesting this morning that we can remember this one battle as part of the Somme that occurred, as I say, on this very, very day. And as we think back as to what happened over those 4 years between 1914 and 18, there are 3 words that come to my mind. I think of those brave warriors, where they found themselves, and others involved in the war effort, who did their duty for their country, who did it together, and who were prepared to make sacrifices. And I think these today, very much today, there are lessons that we can learn from those brave warriors of World War I and those who have served their country and countries since. The duty, the togetherness and the sacrifices they were prepared to make. Thank you, David. That is poster number 148. That was produced by the government in 1914 with the encouragement of Lloyd George. He wanted the Welsh nation to do its duty and for the men from the nation to respond to the King's call and to go forward. And so they produced this Welsh language poster. My name is David Jones. I'm Welsh, but sadly I don't speak God's language. I'm sure there are others here who pronounce that better than I can. Ani baniaeth, Sida Galau, Amiai Deruf Ddyn. And I understand the translation for that is independence calls for the bravest men. Lloyd George was encouraging the Welsh men to go forward, and he had this poster specifically done so those would be encouraged here in their own language the duty that they should go forward and do. And many, many responded. Now, there may be some Welsh speakers here. Am I right in thinking that Ani baniaeth is spelt incorrectly? Someone said to me it should be 2 N's. And I thought, well, that's about right for the English, getting the Welsh wrong, isn't it, as usual? I wouldn't say the government.
Should be 2 N's.
But this is what that was done to encourage men to do their duty. Thank you, David. And we see here a photograph from Carnarvon, with Lloyd George there standing in the centre, and all these men coming forward to do their duty, responding to the call. 272,000 Welshmen responded to the call and went out to do their duty for their country. They saw their duty as to defend their country, and they fulfilled their duty. Many of us, I think today, don't even understand what our duty is. We don't know what our duty should be. And that, I think, is a lesson for us all to learn, especially today, to sit down and decide what our duty is and then to do it. Because by that, we and others can benefit. These men, they believed their duty was to go for their country, and that is what exactly they did. They followed their duty. Thanks, David. But also, they went together. I'm sure you've all heard about the PALS regiments. And the idea behind this was, from Kitchener, was that if you allowed men to enlist together and train together and even fight together, then you would encourage enlistment. And it did work. So you had many towns and cities sending their own regiments to the battles. And you had many groups of workers from factories. You had groups of footballers going together. You had different professions going together, all in what they called the PALS regiments, because they were doing it together. And we see here a photograph of the PALS leaving Rill. I think that may even be Palace Avenue, because I think it might be the Palace Hotel at the far end there. And these men, they were leaving Rill to go off for their 2 years training. This photograph was taken in 1914. These men were going off for their training for 2 years so they'd be ready for the Somme. And what I would mention to you is that across North Wales, the training camps were in Pwllheli and Llandudno and Rill. So men from Prestatyn may well have been there. They will have gone to Rill to do their training, to go forward, and together to do their duty. You see, they worked together to benefit their country, to benefit their community, to benefit each other. And I think in our country today, that's something, a lesson that we need to learn and need to apply. We need to be working together. Yes, we all have different opinions. We all have different views how things should be done. But if we work together and try and find a common way, I think we can all benefit from that. Just as these men decided their duty overrode everything else, and they're going to work together for the benefit of themselves and for others. As I say, 2 years they went off for their training. Thank you, David. This is a very poignant photograph. These are the shrouds of the Somme. This was a very poignant exhibition that was put on down in Exeter on the 1st of July this year. And at 7:30 in the morning, this exhibition opened with the blow of the whistle. And here we see 19,240 small replicas, actually wrapped up in their shrouds, representing each one of the men who died on the first day of the Battle of the Somme. In one day, 19,240 men gave their lives. That was a sacrifice they made. Someone once said they were 2 years in the training and 10 minutes in the destroying. That was the sacrifice they were prepared to make. And to put that in perspective, just think the population of Prestatyn at the present time is round about 20,000. It gives some perspective to what happened in those brutal days in the Battle of the Somme so many decades ago. But these men were prepared to make that sacrifice. They were prepared to do it together to do their duty. And it's a lesson again I think we can all learn, again, especially today with all the turmoil we have in our country and in our world. Be prepared to make sacrifices, to put the other person first, to hopefully help them move forward rather than put ourselves forward, as these men did, prepared to make the ultimate sacrifice. Thank you, David. You may recognise that. That is Prestatyn's War Memorial, first erected in 1920 and then rededicated again in 1952. And if you go and look at that War Memorial there, you'll see the plaques there of the brave men of our town who gave their lives in both the World Wars. And you see the plaques there, 1914-18, and the list of those brave men. Then 1939-45, and again the list of those brave men. But I've done some research, and when you go and look at it again, you go and find Private Samuel Williams. Samuel was born and brought up in Prestatyn, lived on Victoria Road. He was a carter. Well, no doubt that means he moved things around on his cart to different places. He was a house painter as well to try and make ends meet. But when the call came in 1915, he went to Rhyl and he enlisted in the Royal Welsh Fusiliers because he wanted to do his duty together with his friends, and he was prepared to make the ultimate sacrifice. Samuel died on the 11th of July 1916 in the Battle of the Somme. As a young man there, it just gives it, I think, makes it more personal, makes it more real to think of an individual who actually gave his life on that day in the Somme. Someone who was prepared to do his duty together with others by making that sacrifice. Thank you, David. Now, another individual we have here, not a local man, although his father was actually born in Holywell, but moved down south where this young man was born. And this young man, you may have heard of him, he's called David Jones. Now, it's not me. Though someone suggested yesterday it looks a little bit like me, but I don't know. Again, a man, an artist, a printer, he was an engraver. Again, he saw his duty and he joined the London Welsh Fusiliers and went out to the Somme, and he was wounded in Mametz Wood. And why is this gentleman important? Well, not just because he's got a great name, David Jones, but this is the guy who wrote a very famous work of prose about the First World War. You may have heard of it, called In Parenthesis. It's a long work in 7 parts, 187 odd pages, and it depicts the horror of what he and his friends went through, the horrors of war. And yet, David found God. After all he'd been through, after all the horror he'd seen in the First World War, he was wounded at Mametz Wood, but he went back after he recovered and fought till the end of the war. After all that he'd seen and gone through, he didn't turn his back on God. He actually found God and became a real man of faith. He'd seen what man could do to man. He'd seen that the world has no answers. He'd seen that by turning your back on God is not the thing to do. What you need to do is turn to God. And even though he'd seen all these awful things, that's exactly what he did. Because he knew the enemy were just doing their duty. They were working together. They were making sacrifices. He knew those who were objecting to the war were the same. They were doing their duty as they saw it. They were together making their sacrifices. He realised that man's efforts were not enough. And he'd seen it firsthand, the death and the destruction in that battle. And he turned to God. And I think there's a real lesson for us all there. Because in this world today, I think people are seeing so many difficulties and problems, and they're turning their back on God. And I would like to suggest the better thing to do is to turn to God, to try and find the answers and a way of moving forward. Thank you, David. A verse in the Bible from the Gospel of Matthew. My Father, if it is not possible for this cup to be taken away unless I drink it, may your will be done. These words are spoken by Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane just before his crucifixion on Calvary's cross. And these words speak to me about the Lord Jesus Christ doing his duty to bring us together with God by making history's ultimate sacrifice. May your will be done. He could have turned his back, gone elsewhere, but no, he loved us and the world so much he's prepared to make that sacrifice to bring us together with God by doing his duty. And that's a lesson I think would be good for all of us to think on, to go away and ponder and to learn as we go in the coming days and in the coming year. So all of us, if you leave this place this afternoon after hopefully you've enjoyed the service and enjoyed the food a little later on, perhaps you could take that as your motive for the year, to decide what your duty is and do it, to work together to benefit all, and to be prepared to make sacrifices so that all may benefit. As we think of that, let's remember those brave souls of not only just the First World War, but the conflict since, who were prepared to do that. But more than that, remember Jesus, who did his duty by bringing us back together with God and paying history's ultimate sacrifice.